I have no proper intro or anything, so here's my username. We're starting now. Ports are the unsung heroes of gaming. Think of one of your favorite games ever, and the likelihood that it was released in another console and was ported to the current one you're on is larger than you probably expect it to be. That's why the quality of these ports is extremely important. You never truly know where your target audience is, and a bad port could sour your experience with the game or the franchise as a whole. This fact goes double for the No More Heroes series. The importance of these games being in multiple systems cannot be overstated, since I'd wager around half of the fans of this series are people who never played the initial releases, but grew up hearing horror stories of a certain boss thanks to the Countdown community. Because of this, you'd think the people in charge of these would take extremely good care of that, right? Yeah, you'd fucking think that, wouldn't you? No More Heroes has a very interesting history with ports, one that I don't see discussed that often. I decided to make it my goal to tell this story to the best of my abilities and talk about every single No More Heroes port from No More Heroes to No More Heroes 3. Originally this is going to be one long video talking about the 4 games, but this video you're going to see alone took me 2 years to gather the motivation to finish. Adobe also kept crashing on me, so I decided to split the video in 2 parts. This part will be covering No More Heroes and No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle, with a future part covering Travis Strikes Again and No More Heroes 3. So without further ado, here's the strange ports of No More Heroes. Part 1. Also, most of the following audio was recorded over a year ago, and sometimes I reference the video as if it's still just one long video, so I'm sorry for that.
If challenge had a taste, you'd be quite delicious.
I'm covering both of these games at the same time, mostly because whenever they got re-released, the ports released at the same time, with only one exception I'll talk about later. We have to talk about the initial releases of these games first, of course. What will we compare the re-releases to if we didn't? Of course, this is focused on performance, since if you came here for a review of these games, then good and neat work. No More Heroes 1 and 2 released on December 6, 2008 and January 26, 2010 respectively, both for the Nintendo Wii. For the technical aspects of most games I'll talk about, I will use other sources that will be listed on screen and in the description. Both games performed about as well as you'd expect to on the Wii. They ran at 480p and hovered over 30 frames, which the word hovers is definitely key here. I'm just gonna come out and say it. The first versions of these games I played were on the Switch, and going back to play the original Wii versions was awful. The frame rate dips I wrote about in the original script were an understatement. Whenever there is blood on screen, the games shit their pants. And if you know anything about No More Heroes, you might notice just a tiny issue with what I just said. I actually played them on Wii U not too long ago, which is how I got this footage, and No More Heroes 2 ran surprisingly well. Not the first game though, that ran very similarly to how it did on the Wii. These could also be problems with the Wii that I have that bleed onto the game and how it runs, but there are some other issues with the game that are not tied to this Wii. Camera control with the D-pad was removed from the second game because they wanted a sort of burst roll forward option, which they should have just accepted they couldn't do. The second game especially needs camera control, since it always feels like the camera is stuck right up Travis's ass. Also, the first game didn't support any controller other than Wii Remote and Nunchuck. I know No More Heroes is kinda made for this control scheme, but the second game had a classic controller support, so having more options is only a positive. Another minor issue was that the first game was censored in a few regions, namely Japan and Europe, and the second game was censored only in Japan, mainly due to the age rating shenanigans and stuff I'll talk about later. Despite these issues, the games reviewed well, and so the games went on to receive ports. 10 years after the official release. Yeah, the series went MIA for a bit until TSA was announced, but after that we received the No More Heroes 1 and 2 Switch ports. Both ports released on October 28th, 2020, and I'm just gonna come out and say it, No More Heroes 1 and 2 on Switch are by far the best way to play these games. Let's start off with something relatively simple, being that now the games run at a somewhat consistent 60 frames and at 720p natively on Switch. When you place them next to each other, the Switch port looks so much cleaner and sharper, it looks amazing. On top of this, huge frame dips have basically become a thing of the past. Now No More Heroes doesn't decide to clock out after you accidentally kill 2 dudes at the same time. On top of that, the only gameplay issues I had with the game that weren't issues with the core of the game were fixed. Now both games have motion controls and standard controller support, as well as camera control. Hey guys, editing Hedgie here. I'm just making a small correction here because in the original audio recording I said that the Switch versions had comically fast load times, at least in comparison to the original versions. But then I rewatched the footage and realized that the load times really weren't that different. They were just off by like a couple of seconds, which is still a change. It's still something that is a positive for the Switch version, but I feel like the wording in the original section was a little bit off, so I'm just here correcting that. It's still a good change, but it's less significant than I originally made it out to be. The games are also fully uncensored in every region they're in, and all we lost in translation was one music video and song because of copyright issues. In case you're wondering, it's Heavenly Star. This was specifically for the first game, and it was basically treated as Sylvia's theme. Bizarrely enough, the song was replaced with It's Kill or Be Killed from the sequel. Like, it fits Sylvia's character. It's just weird to use a song from the sequel to replace a song in the prequel. These ports were published by Xseed Games and developed by Engine Software, which previously had aided Suda and Killer 7 to PC. These guys made the definitive versions of No More Heroes 1 and 2, and I implore you, if you want to try the series out, do yourself a favor and play these versions. You will not regret it. You might be thinking for the intro I made for this video and the title, it might be really weird that the first ports I'm talking about are extremely positive ones. But trust me, viewer, this is the calm before the storm, because now I got a very peculiar question to ask you. Out of every platform, which one do you think should have gotten these two games next? Got your answer? For those of you who said PC, you're kinda right. On February 11th, 2021, No More Heroes 1 and No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle made their grand debut on PC through Amazon Luna. If you don't know what Amazon Luna is, first of all, I don't blame you. Second, Amazon Luna is Amazon's foray into cloud gaming. If you don't know what that is, somehow, imagine Netflix but for games. It's far more complicated than that, but for the sake of this video, that's all you need to know. Them making it here before Steam is extremely bizarre, because No More Heroes is not a system seller, or service seller? I love this series as much as the next person, but if you're telling me you know someone who got a Switch or a Wii purely because they wanted to try out any No More Heroes game, you're either a liar or friends with a psychopath. Amazon was genuinely hoping these games would rake in sales. Calling all Travis Touchdown and Travis lookalikes, what the fuck does that even mean? They even made this meme with Travis and Scott Pilgrim. This is one of the most bizarre, semi-official pieces of media that exists of No More Heroes, and that is counting the toilet paper. This doesn't even look like something Travis would say. Anyway, enough about this weirdness about the port simply existing. How does it play? I don't know. Not only is Luna not available in Puerto Rico, but even if it was, both games already left Luna. You heard me right, after less than 3 years, these system sellers sold no systems and were taken off the service. Suspiciously enough, both games left on separate dates despite releasing on the same date, with No More Heroes leaving on February 11th, 2023, and the sequel getting dropped in March 2nd, 2023. I'm not sure why the No More Heroes 3 contract lasted slightly longer than the No More Heroes contract. If it was extended like an extra year, then yeah, I get it, but giving it just one more month, it just doesn't click with me. Anyway, the only gameplay opinions I found online are from Travis Dice Again on Twitter, which is a source that I trust, which said imagine the PC ports but with input delay. Fuck right, the PC port. On June 9th, 2021, wow, the same year as the Luna release, that exclusivity lasted less than the Confederacy. No More Heroes 1 and 2 released on Steam, and I'm not gonna lie, I kinda wish they didn't. If you've heard anything about these ports, it's about how awful they are. I don't have any evidence of this, but when they initially dropped, both games had a mostly negative score on Steam, which is insane for a series whose lowest score on sites like Metacritic was 67 on TSA, which is still just mixed. They all went on and on about crashes and performance issues. It didn't help that I also found out these ports existed the day they were released, when I was scrolling through Steam. They were not advertised at all. It's like Marvelous knew they had a stinker in their hands and they just wanted to wash their hands off it and make some money back. For that reason, I avoided these ports for the longest time, not really having disposable income to buy them, and even if I did, I knew I'd leave fully disappointed. Then I remembered, not only am I a liar, I'm an employed liar. I decided to get the entire trilogy on PC when I decided to start scripting this video, and of course that entailed me beating them and getting the PC port experience firsthand. So after experiencing these amazing works of art, I can safely assure that I mildly regret my gaming experience. These ports are bizarre. They're like a mimic. You think you're getting an alright port until you start getting closer to it and it's just ready to pounce on you with horrible PC settings and performance issues. Let's start off with the fact that the PC port doesn't have keyboard and mouse support. Yes, these PC ports for the personal computer whose main input mechanism is keyboard and mouse don't support it. It's not like they had no way to translate the control schemes. They already translated motion with the right stick for the Switch release. Even on the original version of No More Heroes 2, it's not like they couldn't do the same motion with the mouse. A bit of a spoiler for later, but the PC version of No More Heroes 3 did just what I'm suggesting and it works fine. But no, these games required a controller. Even if you had a controller, I sure hope that controller is an Xbox One because it doesn't recognize any other. I tried using my Switch Pro controller and it just turned off the second I turned the game on. The Switch controller's not working will be far more egregious the deeper we dive into the sport, but just know that in reality, this isn't much of an issue because of Steam input. In fact, I tried to use the Pro controller in other games and it was acting weird too, so it could be that. You could have finagled with the settings back when Steam input wasn't a thing, but having to literally tinker with your launcher settings shouldn't be a requirement for your game to simply function. On top of that, if you don't like the default configuration of the controller, then screw you because there's no in-game setting to change the controllers. Yeah, no input remapping in the PC game. I'm sure it wasn't too much of a hassle to add that option to this game's configuration menu. Speaking of which, this is the configuration menu for this 32-bit executable game in 2024, which by the way, yeah, this game is only available as a 32-bit executable. I didn't know where else to put it in the script. Did I fall into a black hole? Am I actually in the year 2010 and I just can't tell? Why does Sonic Generations have a better configuration menu than this 2022 release? What's even weirder about this is that all the settings except anti-aliasing are already in the game itself, so why didn't they just add an extra menu option to add anti-aliasing in the game? You already changed button prompts, so adding a new option shouldn't be that bad. Speaking of anti-aliasing, that is your only quality option. No options for resolution, texture quality, or frame rate, nothing. I know these are upscaled Wii games, but if your PC for whatever reason can't run either of these, you're shit out of luck. Go get a Switch and play the games like the rest of us. Speaking of the Switch, I guess it's time to peel off these ports mask and reveal them for what they truly are. If you didn't know, Marvelous basically took the Switch ports and that's it, that's all they did. That's why the customization options are so limited. It's basically the Switch port thrown onto PC without any real regards for translating the games faithfully to PC. I mean both technically and literally when I say translate. Hey guys, should I press the B button or the button? The most annoying part of this minigame is that neither of them work, only the A button does. For fuck's sake, they didn't even bother changing the Joy-Con icons in the pure white Glastonbury minigame. I'm half shocked I don't see a weird mode pop up whenever I go charge my katana. This brings into question bugs that were added into the sport specifically, like the fact that you can't do a charge high slash or strike in the first game, the transition from high and low being weird, and why did they crash so much on release? They still crashed a bit after the patches. Interestingly enough, the first game was the one that gave me the most performance issues. Guess the second game already had enough issues to deal with. In my playthroughs, I got a few crashes in No More Heroes 2's result screen and like a million in No More Heroes. But that's mostly because I found a reliable way to crash. If you mash on the result screen, for some reason, the game just really doesn't like that. Even if this was all on the Switch port, it doesn't justify the weirdest and straight up backwards decision taken for these ports. These PC ports for these single player no online capability upscaled Wii games require you to play them while you're online. Why? So if you had a Steam Deck, while you can get both games to work, I don't see why you want to, because you can't play it an inch away from your fucking internet source. At the end of the day, if you have absolutely zero ways to play these games, you don't have a Switch, you have a PC, and don't know or don't want to know how to set up Dolphin despite it performing probably better, and don't mind the fact that you don't have motion controls anymore, as well as putting up with always online requirement, as a last resort, it functions. But I'd highly recommend the Switch versions over this, or even Dolphin. This is also post-patch version by the way, and they promised us another patch God knows when ago, and we are still waiting for it. So, apparently while I was writing the script, the patches that were in development for the past 4 years were finally released, with No More Heroes receiving the patch last year, and No More Heroes 2 receiving it this year. Yeah, that's how long this video has been in development. This deadass feels targeted. I've been thinking of making this video for over 2 years at this point, and it's extremely convenient that every time I hop back on it, something changes with the games. Regardless, I'm not removing what I originally wrote, as I feel it's important to cover the state that these ports were released in, which I feel is unacceptable. Interestingly enough though, most of the issues I had with the original release were fixed. Now keyboard and mouse are fully supported, you can remap the controls now, and you no longer need to be online to play the game. Even the slash stand thing was fixed. Some crashes were fixed, and something I completely missed in my original section is that some achievements didn't pop up when you got them, so that was fixed too. Another thing I forgot to mention, even in the Switch section, was that the baseball minigame was entirely dependent on how hard you swung the remote in the original Wii version, and because of that fact, every other version of the game without motion control had this minigame entirely broken. But then they seem to have fixed it in the most recent patch. They even added some quality of life changes, like the UI changing depending on what controller you're using. And a very weird one, you can now speed up the animation when you fall off a bike to get up faster. Sure, I mean, I'm not complaining. The games even recognize what controller you're using on the fly now, meaning that you can switch between keyboard and controller without any delay, which is pretty cool. Despite all I said, the patches still aren't perfect. That controller remapping? Yeah, that only works in that shitty 2010s config menu that I talked about earlier. I know I suggested this as a change, but like, damn, I didn't literally mean put it in the config menu. Keyboard and mouse support is still also a bit scuffed, since you do all the motion actions with the WASD keys rather than with the mouse, which, spoilers for later on in the video, No More Heroes 3 on PC does, and it works fine. I feel confident now saying that you can play these versions of No More Heroes if you have no access to the Switch version, despite all I've said. But that shouldn't be the case. We waited 3 years, 4 for the second game, for these seemingly minimal changes, most of them being broken mechanics that weren't broken in previous releases. It's one thing to have a new game be patched 6 months after release to fix sizable issues, and it's another thing entirely to port a Wii game to PC and have the game take 3 or 4 years to release a patch that fixes game functions like controller support and crashes, especially given the fact that these issues weren't in the Switch version that they pulled this version from, not even in the original Wii version. On top of this, there's pretty sizable evidence to suggest this patch was entirely worked on by only a single person. Sarah Lane said that she developed this patch for the first game on Twitter, and it's safe to assume from this same tweet that she also entirely worked on the second game's patch. It doesn't look like anyone else is mentioning their work on the patch, so if that's true that she was the only one that worked on them, the time between releases and the patches makes a lot more sense. But it's almost amusing how Xseed and Marvelous can mishandle one of the franchises they have so much goodwill for. I don't believe Xseed and Marvelous should be congratulated for giving us the bare minimum after 4 fucking years of the games releasing and only barely being playable on PC. Before I move on, I want to clarify that I mean no ill will towards Sarah Lane. She did an amazing job with the patches. My complaints are directed squarely at Marvelous and Xseed for proving to us just how little they care about this series. Here's to hoping that future ports don't fare the same way. Back to the video. Now, we're not quite done yet with this section. We are done with Desperate Struggle, but the original still has a few things I wish to talk about. Mainly a port everyone always forgets. Purposefully.
Hey, you know what paradise is, right?
Yes, if you're really into No More Heroes, then you may have seen this coming a mile away. If you didn't, then let me explain to you what this game actually is.
This is no paradise.
After the release of the Wii version of No More Heroes, Marvelous and Grasshopper expressed interest in wanting to reach the, at the time, next-gen consoles. Both the PS3 and Xbox were in talks, but ultimately the PS3 exclusive No More Heroes Heroes Paradise was released on August 16, 2011. This version of the game was developed by AQ Interactive and Field Plus, which suspiciously was absorbed into AQ and became one of their subsidiaries, practically right after Heroes Paradise. Off to a great start, I see. Suspiciously enough, I basically couldn't find anything either of these companies made after 2011. Oh, that's why. But up to then, their resume was filled with a lot of games I've never heard of. A Pokemon arcade game, Arcana Heart, okay, that's actually pretty cool. And fucking Cubic Ninja, you know, the 3DS game that basically opened the back door to mod the system. Look, I want to give this game a fair shot, but when the only recognizable game you have in your resume is one that cracked open an entire console and somehow still reviewed poorly, confidence is not what first comes to mind. Going back to Heroes Paradise, the reason I gave this game its own section was mainly because this port has the largest changes of every port we have or will talk about. This went beyond removing a video or changing the resolution. This is an enhanced port. The first spot this is the most noticeable in is the game's art style, as it has changed drastically from the Wii release, and it's an art choice. Despite what most people think, I genuinely believe that which game's art style you prefer comes down to personal preference but I do still prefer the original. Heroes Paradise looks too much like this will be what No More Heroes will look like in 2013. Some areas of the game, like some environments, do have straight upgrades in comparison to the Wii original, but I believe the charm of the Wii designs and models beats the more high definition look of the PS3 version. Some of the expressions also don't look as funny as the original Wii version because of the remodeling of the characters. The best example of this is the scene where Sylvia kicks Travis out of her limo. It looks infinitely funnier on the Wii version because of the slightly fucked up models. And since I completely forgot to write this in the original script, I'm just gonna state this now. This is the only version of the game where the intro sequence, you know, the fight between Helter Skelter and Travis, got entirely remade. These are new models. It was remade, the animation from the ground up, and I find it really funny because that wasn't even done for the Switch version. Aside from visuals, when you pick up the game, you're almost immediately slapped across the face with gameplay changes. First and most importantly, Travis can now charge his high slash and move like he could in No More Heroes 2. This baffles me because I found out by accident and subsequently started questioning why they didn't bring it back in any of the other ports. It's a genuinely good change and one that deserves to be back in at least the Switch port. There are other objectively positive changes to the gameplay that people tend to obviate because this version is so disliked. Another example is that now you can store dark sides and use them whenever you see appropriate. This is a huge change because I don't think there's enough digits in the universe to properly enumerate how many times I got a really good dark side only for the section I was on to end and basically make me waste that dark side entirely. Funnily enough, this keeps being a problem with the rest of the series, but No More Heroes 3 removes stages, so there's really no other context where you want to use the dark sides. I'm getting ahead of myself. There's a couple of sections before the third game, but I just really like it. But this change isn't all positive. After they're stored, you can't choose which dark side to use. You still use them in the order you received them. Of course, not all gameplay changes are positive. There's some debatable ones like the fact that R2 now kinda is the dedicated grab button. I say kinda because not only does it just pressing the strike button work in some scenarios, but the R2 has more than just that function. For example, now you have to press R2 and square to kill a downed opponent, which is just really annoying. I failed to find the context where I wouldn't want to kill a downed enemy, except maybe farming dark sides, which I can just, you know, stop attacking until he gets up. You also have to press R2 and the circle button to activate the dark sides when you have them stacked, which is an alright change but still kinda tedious. This, unfortunately, is not the only gameplay mechanic that just had another button randomly slapped on top of it. They also made you press down on R3 before doing a killer slash. I need to know who decided on this. This is like a perfect example of first world problems, right? But this doesn't really have a reason to exist other than maybe making it slightly more complex to do a killer slash, but literally no other game in the series that supports gamepad has done this. At least you don't have to use it when you use the PS Move. Wait, right, this game has fucking move support. This game dropped a bit after the PS Move did, so it made sense it'd want to receive support for the game. And the support is fine. A handful of the issues I pointed out earlier get fixed. At best, the game plays exactly the same as it did on the Wii remote when you're using the move, down to removing the pressing R3 thing and going back to just pressing one button to do throws and knockdowns. But this control scheme isn't perfect as it takes one step forward and one step back essentially. The camera is now controlled with the lower face buttons on the move, which is fine to a certain extent, but they have a perfectly functioning D-pad in the navigation controller, which would have been far more intuitive. Along with this, the worst problem of the move control system presents itself. Now you dodge by shaking the remote in the direction you want to go. I shouldn't have to explain why this is stupid, but I'll try my best for anyone who's still lost. Motion in the original No More Heroes had a handful of main functions. These were switching stances, doing killer slashes, and doing jumping strikes when you had them unlocked. What made these fully work without being intrusive was the fact that they all happened in different contexts. In no scenario would you ever do a killer slash when trying to do a stance switch. The only overlap was between stance switch and jumping strike, but you were probably already attacking anyway, so the problem was basically non-existent, and you had to be dashing to do a jumping slash anyway. In Heroes Paradise, you have those three to worry about, as well as dodging, a defensive maneuver thrown into a roster of offense. And since the input for it is practically moving the PS Move in any direction other than forward, it is incredibly easy to miss input when you're trying to switch stances, or even do a jumping slash. So now you have 3 moves with overlap that make any enemy encounter a fucking nightmare and a half, which, by the way, the D-pad is still in the navigation controller. You might be thinking maybe the game wasn't envisioned with the navigation controller, which even if you were right despite them dropping at the same time, The alternative way of using the move still has a fully functional D-pad that you could have used for dodging and the camera control. Also, I'm not sure if my move was just broken, but you have to be weirdly accurate when you are jorking it to charge the katana. I'm not necessarily complaining, but it's interesting regardless. On good news tangentially related to the PS move, this is one of the only versions of No More Heroes where the baseball minigame isn't broken regardless of which controller you're using. So that's pretty cool. On that note, a few part-time job minigames and assassinations were added, which were all fine for the most part, except that one coconut one, that one blew ass. That's really all I have to say for them. None of them really stood out to me. What's a surprisingly good change, and one they should have brought back, is that now on replays, you have the option to immediately warp to the side job or assassination mission. This is so objectively good that I'm baffled that this one also hasn't made it back to later ports. I'm glad it's in this version because it feels like they have Travis speed or something. Travis dash feels like it's significantly slower, but I'm not sure if it's just a placebo of not seeing as much smoke as in the Wii version. If that wasn't enough, even if you want to use the bike, it feels like it gets stuck on damn near everywhere. This, again, I don't really remember happening that much in the Wii version. The overworld in general feels kinda weird. Half of it is just not accessible, and now pressing R1 overlapped the game's map over the screen, which is really useful because the minimap is kinda broken. It no longer shows points of interest in the edges of the map for some reason. I don't know if they changed it because they thought the minimap was too cluttered, but now it's just annoying to do anything. In the original, it was only annoying until you followed the general direction the map told you to go on. It was more intuitive in general. This game also sometimes refuses to perform. Whenever there's too many enemies on screen, the game just drops frames like they're boiling. This also happened on Wii, but one of these consoles is basically two GameCubes stuck together, and the other one can run Metal Gear Solid 5. The one mission I grinded a lot to get LB caused the game to slow down so much sometimes that when I mashed the attack button, the game thought I was holding it down. This shit looks like a fucking Game & Watch. That coupled with the screen tearing, it's absolutely insane, but at least it's not literally always. The screen tearing is though. I forgot to mention it in the first drop, so I'm just stuffing it wherever I can. This game also came out after the second game, so they wanted to do some cross promotion. So they decided to add 5 bosses from No More Heroes 2, and I genuinely think this is super cool. If you played both games, you know that they are both functionally different. It's kind of hard to explain, but you just kind of know when you're fighting a boss from the first game and a boss from the second game. So it's really cool to see bosses from the second game get translated to the first game style. Now, not only are the bosses horribly designed, but they also have comically large amounts of iframes. Yippee! The bosses they brought back were Skelter Helter, Nathan Copeland, Kimmy Howell, Matt Helms, and Alice Twilight. Why her? She's the second to last boss in No More Heroes 2. Wasn't there a better option to spoil the rank 2 boss? The other bosses are either early bosses or special bosses like Kimmy Howell. Alice kinda sticks out a bit. On the note of additional content, this game had DLC. I don't have access to it, but from what I can tell, it's just cosmetics for your bike and katanas. Some of the katana ones are pretty cool, like Henry's sword for one of them. There's also a model viewer that was also DLC, and you can see every model in this mode. Even Jean! Look at her and her 12 polygons. And that's it for the original No More Heroes. It's what I would have said if you weren't standing in that perfectly placed rug. See, all this time I was actually not talking about No More Heroes Heroes Paradise. I've actually been talking about No More Heroes Red Zone. No More Heroes Red Zone is an updated version of the original No More Heroes Heroes Paradise. Wait, original No More Heroes Heroes Paradise? There's more than one? Okay, I need to do a bit of explaining here. We can best do this with a timeline. In 2008, the original No More Heroes was released. In April 2010, Heroes Paradise releases in Japan, followed by Red Zone releasing exclusively in Japan in July 2010. After this, Heroes Paradise is released in May 2011 in Europe and August 2011 in North America. Then we get the Switch and PC ports later, but we don't care about those for now. All of these versions are the same, with only text differences for the most part. There's another big difference, but I'll talk more about it extensively when I start talking about Japanese Heroes Paradise. From now on, I'll refer to the first Heroes Paradise I talked about as the International Heroes Paradise, or Red Zone, and the one I'll talk about now as JP Heroes Paradise. You may be questioning why I'm talking about this game now, as I made it implicitly clear that I went by chronological order from all the ports I've covered so far. The reason goes back to what this game actually is. Considering when it was released, you might have already put together that this is basically an earlier version of Heroes Paradise we have internationally. Think of it as a Persona 5 to International's Persona 5 Royal. And the interesting part about this game is that Red Zone isn't a patch, it's a whole ass new game. International Heroes Paradise is the only version of Heroes Paradise most Americans and Europeans know about. So when they shit on Heroes Paradise, they're shitting on the best version of it available. So if everyone always dunks on this game, just how much worse is its original version? Well, let's start off by the fact that I already technically lied. It's not an original version. It's an original versions. Yeah, this version released on 360 as well as PS3 with a different age rating too. The PS3 release had a 0D rating, the equivalent of ESRB's M, and the 360 version had a 0Z rating, the equivalent of the ESRB's adult only rating. The 360 version isn't censored that much, given its C rating. There's only one real case of censorship, being Death Metal's boss fight, where Death Metal isn't decapitated because I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's a culture thing, I'm not sure. This censorship is the one they use as a base for Redstone. I'm singling out Redstone here because International Heroes Paradise is fully uncensored, like the North American Wii original. This is also a great time to mention that I didn't play the 360 version. This is mainly due to the fact that my pockets are crying. The 360 version of this game is region locked, meaning I need a Japanese 360 to be able to play it, and that was just too much, man. The PS3 version is funnier anyways, as it follows the censorship the Japanese Wii version had. The most important change is the fact that when you kill enemies they turn into black mist, but that's boring. We have to talk about my favorite of the changes. You see, a lot of No More Heroes' kill cutscenes have, as a focus, mutilation. Death Metal's hand, Shinobu's hand, a handful of characters getting decapitated. These are all focuses of cutscenes they appear in. So when this censorship was implemented, most of them had to be awkwardly worked around. The two hands related ones just had their hands just be there. It makes very little sense because in both cases, in the original version, their weapons flew up with their hands. So these censors look extremely funny because they just look like they're really tired. Holly Summers had to be killed, and awkwardly her entire body was just practically left intact after the grenade blew up in her face, because in the original cutscene she looked like this. But the fact her body remained was very important to the cutscene that takes place in the game afterwards. Anyway, back to what we were actually here for. Just how bad is this version of the game exactly, compared to the other ports we've talked about? It's pretty bad. First off, the art style is different again, this time resembling the intentionally washed out colors of the original. It's again up to personal preference which art style you prefer more. I personally still prefer the originals, but it's debatably a positive. We also have Japanese voice acting? What the hell? Why wasn't this brought back with subsequent re-releases? It's such an interesting part of No More Heroes' history, and I see no reason as to why. Okay, so calling this dub bad is a little mean. There's some genuinely good performances here. The main protagonist is not one of them. This is mainly due to the voice direction, since this cast is kinda stacked. But Travis sounds like a snobby loser, and you can argue that that's his character in the game, but the whole point of Travis is that he's a walking contradiction. His voice and fighting capabilities juxtaposes brilliantly with the fact that Travis is a hoity loser who entered an Assassins Association and kept getting higher in the rankings mainly for Poon.
Hey, when I hit number 1, you better be looking your best.
なあ、俺が1位になるまで体を磨いといてくれよ。
Overall, the Japanese dub had a more anime-esque direction. You know exactly what I mean. The influxes in the voices and overall tones of the characters. With some characters like Destroyer Man, Sylvia, and Shinobu, it kinda works, but for most others, like Travis and especially Henry, it falls flat at best, or feel wrong and misplaced at worst.
Oh, about 10 years ago. Yeah, that's right. Because we were both in college at the time.
かれこれ、もう10年近くになる。お互い学生結婚だったから。
It could also be biased as I'm technically American,
island of garbage.
but I also like to believe it's not, as this is the only version of No More Heroes that ever had this dub. Yes, not even the Japanese exclusive Redstone had this as an option. An interesting side effect of this dub is that I guess Jean's monologue wasn't sped up. I say this because you can hear parts of it bleeped out.
Okay. I'll make it short and quick.
You are my half-brother. You know that manga called Miyuki? The Japanese one? Well, it's like that. Your father abandoned my mother to run off with your mother. It broke her heart beyond repair. She killed herself. Knowing I had nowhere to go, he took advantage of me. Ever since I can remember, she was left.
Okay. それじゃあかいつまんで言うと。
あんたとは腹違いの兄弟なわけ。言ってまんまるでしょあんな関係。あんたの父親はうちのママを捨ててあんたの母親を取った。私のママは失礼なのに自殺したわ。あの男は身寄りのない私の闇につけ込んで、幼い頃からしてたの。汚いアパートに住まわされて。
Interesting stuff. This means the only No More Heroes games with Japanese dubs are specifically Japanese Heroes Paradise and No More Heroes 3, but we'll get to that one later. The only games that dodged a Japanese dub were TSA, since it had like 4.5 spoken lines. And No More Heroes 2 because fuck No More Heroes 2. Anyway, this is the only piece of content Japanese Heroes Paradise has over Heroes Paradise, since practically everything else the international release added is just not here. I can't count on the game too much for not having PS move support or the sequel's bosses, since they didn't exist at the time Japanese Heroes Paradise dropped. And I can't say much about the bonus missions and side jobs not being there, since from what I've been able to find, there's no evidence that they were cut from the game or anything, so maybe they just didn't have the ideas for them at this point. What I can clown on is the fact that this game doesn't have the warping to missions thing that Redstone had. It's such a small but also necessary change when most of the game is grinding money. Also, this game doesn't use any motion, so stuff like charging katanas or jumping with the bike is all done with the right stick now, which isn't really a bad thing. The reason I mention this is because in the international release, you had to shake the remote to do both, even if you were using a normal controller. So it's good the previous release had an alternative. In International Heroes Paradise, this wasn't too responsive on release, but there was a patch released that made it better to the point where I believe it's the fastest way to charge your katana in the series. I mentioned this patch because Japanese Heroes Paradise also had a patch, but I'm still looking to find what exactly changed. The answer I've come up with is that the game crashes less, which by the way, the game crashed like 3 times on me when I had enough money to get to the next rank fight. If you played this game before and know how the saving works, you're probably as annoyed as I was when this happened. This game made me panic save way more than I had in probably any other game I've ever played. Not that I wanted to, because basically every toilet made the game's frame rate tank to single digits. This is the reason why this version of the game blows as much as it does. If you thought the performance on the international release was bad, you're not even ready to see a game that takes its max frame rate as a mere suggestion, and this game is a rebellious teenager. Any shop you enter, or basically any controlled environment, makes the game's frame rate be comparable to a broken PC trying to run Cyberpunk on max settings. Thankfully, you don't have to deal with the blood making the frame rate dip, since there's only one cutscene where there's even blood, but that hardly matters when literally everything else makes the frame rate dip. The performance in general blows. The load times are also absurd. I'm pretty sure you can beat a boss in the later No More Heroes games, while JP Heroes Paradise just loads up. It's literally the Gen 4 Pokemon games, but if it made even less sense because this is the fucking PS triple. So you have none of the improvements of the International Heroes Paradise, other than replaying bosses while maintaining the bad changes, like pressing R3 before doing a killer slash, or having to press R2 before killing a knockdown opponent. And in place of those improvements, you have a shitty Japanese dub and an even worse performance, while the PlayStation release is also censored. Do yourself a favor, and if your curiosity is that big, just play the international release or Redstone. But I'd advise you to steer clear from whatever the hell they did here. And that's actually it for the first No More Heroes. I beat it like 3 times for this video, and that was choosing to skip the Wii port. I don't want to play any of these games again until No More Heroes 7 releases. God damn. And that's it for the first part. For those of you who know me closely, you guys know that this has been a super huge project for me for super long, and I'm very excited to at least share part of it. I really do hope I can get the second part done this year, but I'm not making any promises. Part of the reason why I divided it in 2 parts is because I'm not super confident in the project, and I want to see what reaction the first part receives, and use that feedback to fuel what I'll do for the second part. The second part's already scripted, and the TSA audio is already recorded, so all I gotta do is record the No More Heroes 3 audio, and find the motivation to edit. I know my editing isn't the best, but I tried as hard as I could to make the video as visually interesting as possible. This is my very first time using Premiere after all. But I do want your feedback. Please let me know if you liked the video, if you didn't like it, what you liked and didn't like about the video. Even if you didn't like the video in general, any feedback will be read and taken into consideration, since I'll probably get like 1K views at best. Sorry if I misspoke a lot, by the way. I noticed I did that a bunch in the recording, and that was pretty bad, but I didn't find the motivation to re-record the audio, so I just kind of worked around it. I plan to re-release a supercut after the second part is over, in which I'll fix whatever issues I found in the first and second part, and I'll slice them together to make them into what I originally wanted to make of them. But yeah, that'll be very No More Heroes Redstone of me. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.